She had delivered final meals to 43 condemned men. But Jerome Washington was the first to ask for something she couldn't find in the prison kitchen, and the first to make her remember why she'd become a nurse in the first place. Welcome back, beautiful souls. Hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because today's story will shatter your heart and rebuild it again. Tonight, a condemned father, his lost daughter, and a nurse who risks everything for one impossible wish. Let's begin. The overhead bulbs in Block C cast their harsh, unforgiving glow as Catherine Morrison wheeled her medical cart down the corridor, her white shoes squeaking against the polished concrete floor. 22 years she'd been walking these halls. 22 years of checking blood pressure and dispensing medications to men who would never see another Christmas, another spring, another chance. At 58, Kate had perfected the art of emotional detachment. Her graying blonde hair was pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn since her first day. Her uniform pressed and spotless, her expression carefully neutral. The inmates called her Ice Queen behind her back, a title she'd earned through years of professional distance, and one she wore like armor. "Morning, Nurse Morrison," called out Tommy Rodriguez from Cell 7, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness that death row inmates sometimes adopted. "How's your day treating you?" Kate nodded curtly without stopping. Small talk was a luxury she couldn't afford, not here, not with men whose days were numbered. She'd learned that lesson the hard way 15 years ago when she'd gotten too close to an inmate named Bobby Chen. She'd held his hand during his final moments, and when it was over, she'd gone home and cried for 3 days straight. Never again. Her cartwheels caught on an uneven floor tile as she approached Cell 12. And she paused to adjust the blood pressure cuff that had shifted. Through the small window, she could see Jerome Washington sitting cross-legged on his narrow bunk, a worn paperback book in his hands. Unlike the others, he never called out to her, never tried to engage her in conversation. In the 3 months since his transfer to death row, he'd been nothing but quietly polite during their medical interactions. "Good morning, Mr. Washington," she said, unlocking the food slot. "Time for your medication." Jerome looked up from his book, beloved by Toni Morrison, she noticed, and rose gracefully despite his shackles. He was a tall man, probably in his early 40s, with intelligent eyes and graying temples that gave him an almost scholarly appearance. Hard to believe he was here for... She pushed the thought away. It wasn't her job to judge guilt or innocence. "Morning, Nurse Morrison," he replied, his voice carrying a slight southern accent that spoke of magnolia trees and front porch conversations. "How are you holding up?" The question caught her off guard. In all her years here, no inmate had ever asked about her well-being. She found herself actually looking at him, really looking for the first time since his arrival. "I'm fine, Mr. Washington. Just take your medication." He accepted the small paper cup with 2 white pills and the water she offered through the slot. Instead of immediately swallowing them, he held her gaze. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about something lately, about last wishes and such." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "When the time comes, and I know it's coming soon, there's something I'd like to ask you. Not now, but when the time comes." Kate felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the carefully constructed wall she'd built around her heart. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Washington, I'm just the medical staff. For any special requests, you'll need to speak with—" "I know what you are, Nurse Morrison," he interrupted gently. "And I know what you're not. But I also know something else about you." He tilted his head slightly, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You got kind eyes behind all that professional distance. The kind of eyes that have seen real hurt and came through the other side." Before she could respond, he swallowed his medication and handed back the empty cups. "Just think about it," he said, settling back onto his bunk. "When the time comes." Kate locked the food slot with hands that trembled slightly, a reaction that annoyed her. She'd been having those trembles more often lately. Usually when she thought about Michael, her son would have been 35 next month if he'd lived past 22. If that drunk driver hadn't run the red light. If she'd been a better mother, kept him home that night, instead of letting him go out with friends. She pushed her cart to the next cell. forcing herself back into the familiar rhythm of her rounds. But Jerome Washington's words echoed in her mind, kind eyes that have seen real hurt and came through the other side. The problem was, she wasn't sure she had come through to the other side. Some days, she felt like she was still trapped in that hospital waiting room 13 years ago, still waiting for news that would never come. 3 cells down, she encountered the usual chaos of death row morning routine. Inmates shouting at each other across the corridor. The clang of metal on metal. The constant underlying tension of men with nothing left to lose. But cell 12 remained quiet, and she found herself glancing back toward it as she continued her rounds. By the time she reached the medical station to restock her supplies, Kate realized she was thinking about Jerome Washington in a way she hadn't thought about an inmate in years, as a person rather than just another case number. The realization troubled her. "You look thoughtful this morning," observed Dr. Patricia Wells, the prison physician, as she reviewed charts at the small desk they shared. Pat was one of the few people at the facility Kate considered a friend, though even that friendship was carefully maintained within professional boundaries. "Just tired," Kate replied, reorganizing her medical supplies with more care than necessary. "The Washington execution is scheduled for next Friday," Pat said quietly. "1 week from today. Have you reviewed his medical protocol?" Kate's hands stilled on a bottle of blood pressure medication. "I have. He's been asking to speak with you specifically. Not me. Not the chaplain. You. Any idea why?" The question hung in the air between them, like smoke from a cigarette no one wanted to claim. Kate continued her restocking, avoiding Pat's knowing gaze. "No idea," she lied. But that wasn't entirely true. Something in Jerome Washington's manner, in the way he'd looked at her with those deep, understanding eyes, suggested he saw past her professional facade to the wounded woman beneath, and that terrified her more than she cared to admit. What do you think drives someone to maintain such emotional distance in their work? Have you ever had to build walls to protect yourself? Share your thoughts below. As her shift ended and Kate walked through the prison's multiple security checkpoints, she found herself wondering what kind of last wish a condemned man might have that he thought only she could fulfill. Despite her better judgment, despite 22 years of professional detachment, she was curious. And curiosity, she'd learned long ago, was a dangerous thing in a place like this. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, piercing through Kate's restless sleep like a siren. She'd been dreaming about Michael again. Always the same dream, where he was 8 years old, laughing as she pushed him on the swing set in their backyard, his small hands sticky with ice cream, his voice calling higher, "Mama, higher. Morrison, we need you at the facility." Now, Warden Collins' voice was tight with urgency. "Washington's having some kind of medical episode." Kate was dressed and in her car within 10 minutes, muscle memory guiding her through the empty streets toward the prison. Emergency calls weren't unusual, but something in the warden's tone had set her nerves on edge. As she badged through security, Officer Thompson met her at the entrance to Block C. "Started about an hour ago," he explained, as they walked quickly down the corridor. "Thought it was a heart attack at first, but his vitals are stable. He keeps asking for you specifically. Won't let Doc Wells examine him properly." Through the reinforced glass of cell 12, Kate could see Jerome Washington sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, breathing heavily but steadily. His dinner tray lay untouched on his small table, and scattered around him were what looked like dozens of photographs. Some color, some black and white, some so old their edges had begun to curl. "Mr. Washington," Kate called through the food slot. "I'm here. What's going on?" Jerome looked up, and Kate felt her breath catch. His eyes were red-rimmed, not with illness, but with tears. In all her years dealing with condemned men, she'd seen rage, desperation, even acceptance. But this raw grief was something different, something that spoke to the buried pain in her own chest. "Nurse Morrison," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming. I got something today that I wasn't expecting. Something that changed everything." He gestured to the photographs scattered around him like fallen leaves. Kate could see partial images through the slot. A young girl with pigtails, a woman in a graduation gown, what looked like a wedding photo. "May I come in?" The words left her mouth before she could stop them. In 22 years, she'd never requested to enter an inmate's cell for anything other than a medical emergency. Officer Thompson looked surprised. "Ma'am, protocol says." "Open the cell," Kate said firmly. She was surprised by her own authority, by the certainty in her voice. The cell door clicked open with its familiar mechanical sound. Kate stepped inside, acutely aware that she was crossing a line she'd drawn for herself decades ago. The space was smaller than it looked from outside, barely 8 feet by 10, with a narrow bunk, a small metal toilet, and the plastic table where Jerome's untouched dinner waited. Up close, the photographs told a story that hit Kate like a physical blow. A little girl with Jerome's eyes and smile, probably 5 or 6 years old, grinning toothlessly at the camera. The same girl, older, maybe 10, holding a certificate of some kind. A teenage version building a sandcastle on a beach. A young woman in a cap and gown, diploma in hand, radiant with achievement. "Your daughter," Kate whispered, not really asking. "Keisha," Jerome confirmed, his voice breaking on her name. "My baby girl. She was 3 when everything happened, when I was arrested." Kate knelt down beside him, her nursing instincts overriding her carefully constructed boundaries. "Jerome, what happened today? What upset you?" He picked up one of the more recent photographs. The young woman at graduation, and held it with trembling hands. "Her mama, Denise, she's been keeping her from me all these years. Told her I was dead rather than tell her the truth about where I was. But Keisha, she's smart, always been smart. She hired a private investigator when she turned 18. Jerome's hands shook as he sorted through the photographs. These came today. 20 years of her life in pictures. Her first day of school, her dance recitals, her high school graduation, her college graduation just last month. And this? He held up an envelope, Kate's name written on it in careful cursive handwriting. "She wrote me a letter. Found out about the execution date. She wants to meet me, Nurse Morrison. My daughter wants to see her daddy before." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with 20 years of missed birthdays, bedtime stories never read, hugs never given. Kate felt tears prick her own eyes as she looked at the photographs spread around them like a shrine to lost time. "That's wonderful, Jerome. That's what you wanted, isn't it?" Jerome's laugh was bitter, empty. "Warden says no. Security risk, he calls it. Says she's not on the approved visitor list, and with only 5 days left, there's no time to process the paperwork. Says the rules are the rules." Kate felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. What does she want? What did she say in the letter? With careful hands, Jerome unfolded a sheet of lavender stationery. His voice was soft as he read, "Dear Daddy, I hope it's okay if I call you that. I know this letter might be a surprise, and I know you might not want to hear from me after all these years, but I had to try. I graduated from nursing school last month. I guess helping people runs in the family. Mama told me you wanted to be a paramedic before everything happened. I'm engaged to a good man named David, and we're planning a small wedding next month. I know the timing is terrible, and I know this might be impossible, but I was hoping you might give me away. Even if it's just for a few minutes, even if it has to be here. I just want my daddy to walk me down the aisle, even if it's the shortest aisle in the world. I love you, and I forgive you, and I just want to meet you once before I lose you again. Your daughter, Keisha." The silence that followed felt sacred, heavy with the weight of dreams that seemed impossible, and love that had survived 20 years of separation. Kate found herself thinking about Michael, about all the moments she'd never have with him, all the milestones she'd never witness. "She wants you to walk her down the aisle," Kate whispered. "In 5 days, Jerome said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. And the warden says, it can't happen. Says even if she could visit, there's no way to have any kind of ceremony here." Kate looked around the tiny cell, at the concrete walls and barred window, at the photographs scattered like promises on the cold floor. Something was building in her chest, something she hadn't felt in 13 years, the fierce determination to fight for something that mattered. "Jerome," she said quietly, "what if I told you there might be a way? He looked at her with those deep, knowing eyes that had seen through her defenses from the beginning. "You'd do that? For me? For her?" Kate thought about Michael, about the wedding he'd never have, the children he'd never give her. She thought about 22 years of keeping her distance, of protecting herself from caring too much. She thought about the scared little girl in the photographs, who'd grown up to be a nurse, who'd chosen to help people despite having her father torn away from her. "Yes," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I'll find a way." Jerome Washington reached out and took her hand, the first physical contact she'd had with an inmate in 15 years. His palm was warm, his grip gentle but firm. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for seeing her. For seeing me." And in that moment, sitting on the floor of a death row cell surrounded by 20 years of missed moments, Kate Morrison felt her carefully constructed walls finally, completely, beautifully crumble. Kate's hands shook as she poured her third cup of coffee at 6 a.m., the events of the previous night playing on an endless loop in her mind. What had she done? What had she promised? In the harsh light of morning, her commitment to Jerome Washington felt less like heroism and more like professional suicide. She'd barely slept, tossing and turning as reality set in. Security protocols, warden approval, state regulations, media attention if word got out, the phone calls from her supervisor that would inevitably come, the disciplinary hearing, possible termination. And for what? For a convicted killer who'd had 20 years to think about his daughter. The thought made her stomach clench with guilt. She was already backing down, already finding reasons to retreat behind her professional walls. But Jerome's face haunted her. The way he'd looked when he read his daughter's letter, the careful way he'd held those photographs like sacred objects. Her phone buzzed, a text from Dr. Wells' need to talk. "My office, 7 a.m. Kate's coffee suddenly tasted like ash. "Have you lost your mind?" Dr. Patricia Wells didn't look up from the incident report on her desk as Kate entered the cramped medical office. "Officer Thompson filed this at 4 a.m. Says you spent over an hour in Washington's cell last night. Alone. Against every protocol we have." Kate sat down heavily in the plastic chair across from Pat's desk. He was having a medical episode. "I was doing my job." "Your job doesn't include entering cells for emotional counseling sessions." Pat finally looked up, her expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. "Kate, you've been the most professional nurse on this staff for over 2 decades. What's gotten into you?" The question hung between them like an accusation. What had gotten into her? Kate found herself thinking about Michael again, about the nights she'd spent in his hospital room during his final days, reading to him, holding his hand, promising him everything would be okay. The way the doctors and nurses had looked at her with that careful professional sympathy that kept appropriate distance. "His daughter wants to see him," Kate said quietly. "That's not your concern. That's a family services issue, maybe chaplain territory, not medical. She wants him to walk her down the aisle at her wedding." Pat leaned back in her chair, studying Kate's face. "And you think you can make that happen?" The way Pat said it, not cruel, but pragmatic, realistic, made Kate's promise seem foolish and naive. "I don't know. Maybe." "Kate, listen to me. Jerome Washington is scheduled to die in 4 days. 4 days. Even if we could somehow arrange a visit, even if the warden agreed to bend every rule in the book, there's no way to have a wedding ceremony in a maximum security prison. It's not just impractical, it's impossible." Kate felt her resolve wavering like a candle flame in the wind. Everything Pat was saying made perfect sense. She was a nurse, not a miracle worker. She dispensed medication and took blood pressure readings and filed medical reports. She didn't orchestrate impossible reunions or deathbed weddings. "Besides," Pat continued, her voice gentler now, "you're getting too involved. I've seen this before, Kate. Good nurses who start caring too much about the inmates. It never ends well." "I'm not getting involved," Kate protested, but even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. She was more involved than she'd been with anyone since Michael died. Pat pulled a file folder from her desk drawer. "Jerome Washington. Convicted of armed robbery that resulted in the death of a store clerk, 23 years old at the time. Victim was a 60-year-old grandmother working a night shift to help pay for her grandson's college tuition. Kate's stomach dropped. She'd deliberately avoided reading Jerome's case file, hadn't wanted to know the details of his crime. Now, hearing it laid out so starkly, she felt foolish for letting herself see him as just a grieving father. That grandmother had a family too, Kate. Had grandchildren who never got to see her again. Where's their justice in this fairy tale wedding you're trying to arrange? The words hit like physical blows. Kate closed her eyes, seeing Jerome's gentle hands holding his daughter's photograph, hearing the break in his voice as he read Keisha's letter. But now she also saw another family, another set of photographs scattered by grief, another grandmother who would never walk anyone down any aisle. He's paid his debt, Kate said weakly. Has he? That family would disagree. Kate stood up abruptly, needing to escape the suffocating logic of Pat's office. I need to get to rounds. Kate. Pate's voice stopped her at the door. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to protect you. From the warden. From the media. From yourself. You've been through enough loss. Don't set yourself up for more. Kate's morning rounds felt surreal, like moving through a world that had shifted overnight. The familiar sounds of Block C, the shouting, the clanging metal, the shuffle of shackled feet, seemed muted, distant. She moved mechanically from cell to cell, checking pulses and blood pressure, dispensing medications, all while avoiding cell 12. She could feel Jerome's presence there, probably waiting for her, probably hoping for news about his impossible wish. The thought made her chest tight with anxiety, and something that felt uncomfortably like shame. At cell 8, inmate Robert Chen, no relation to the Bobby Chen she'd mourned years ago, called out to her through his food slot. Nurse Morrison, you okay today? You seem different. Kate paused, surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. Robert was serving life without parole for killing his wife's lover in a fit of rage. He'd been on the block for 8 years, always polite, always respectful. She'd never really thought of him as anything more than case number 47291. I'm fine, Robert, just tired. You know, he said quietly, we all heard about Washington getting those pictures last night. Must be rough, finding out about your kid after all these years, then knowing you got only days left. Kate's hands stilled on her medication cart. It's not my place to discuss other inmates' situations. Course not. Just saying, if someone was trying to help him see his girl, well, that'd be a real kindness. The kind that matters when everything else is said and done. Kate looked up at Robert's weathered face through the small window. His eyes held a gentleness that surprised her, a depth of understanding that spoke to his own losses, his own regrets. Robert, what would you give to see your daughter one more time? The question escaped before Kate could stop it. His smile was sad and knowing everything. Nurse Morrison. I'd give everything. By the time Kate reached cell 12, her resolve had crumbled completely. Jerome was sitting at his small table, the photographs carefully arranged in neat piles, Keisha's letter folded beside them. He looked up as she approached, hope and anxiety warring in his expression. Nurse Morrison, any word from the warden? Kate couldn't meet his eyes. Jerome, I may have spoken too quickly last night. The reality is that what Keisha wants, what you both want, it's just not possible within the system's constraints. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Kate forced herself to look at him, to face the disappointment she knew would be there. Instead, she saw something worse. Understanding, acceptance. The quiet dignity of a man who'd learned not to expect miracles. I see, he said simply. Well, I appreciate you trying. I appreciate you caring enough to try. That was it. No anger, no accusations, no demands, just grace in the face of another disappointment, another door closing. Kate felt tears burn behind her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Jerome. Don't be sorry for being human, Nurse Morrison. Don't be sorry for having a heart. The world's got enough people who've forgotten how to care. Kate turned away before he could see her crying, before her professional facade cracked completely. As she walked back down the corridor, she felt like she was abandoning not just Jerome, but some essential part of herself, the part that had once believed in fighting for what was right, the part that had made her want to heal people in the first place. Behind her, cell 12 fell silent, and Kate Morrison, who had spent 22 years learning how to protect herself from caring too much, discovered that some promises, once made, leave permanent scars when broken. The emergency alarm shattered the pre-dawn quiet at 4:23 a.m. Thursday morning, less than 24 hours before Jerome's scheduled execution. Kate jerked awake in her small apartment, muscle memory already pulling her toward her uniform before her brain fully processed the call. Multi-inmate medical emergency, Block C. The automated message crackled through her phone. All medical staff report immediately. 20 minutes later, Kate rushed through the prison's security checkpoints to find chaos erupting in death row. Emergency lights bathed the corridor in harsh red, and the air reeked of smoke and something chemical that made her eyes water. Gas leak in the ventilation system, Officer Thompson explained as he handed her a respirator mask. Started around midnight. We've got 6 inmates showing respiratory distress, including Washington. Kate's heart lurched, but she forced her voice to remain steady. How bad? Bad enough that we can't move them to the infirmary. The whole corridor's contaminated. Dr. Wells is setting up a temporary medical station right here in the hallway, but we need all hands. Kate surveyed the scene with professional efficiency, even as her eyes searched for cell 12. Jerome was visible through his window, sitting on his bunk with a wet towel pressed to his face. Their eyes met briefly across the chaos, and she saw him nod slightly, a quiet acknowledgement that transcended their last conversation. Morrison, Dr. Wells called out sharply. I need you on respiratory monitoring. We've got Washington, Rodriguez, Chen, Foster, Williams, and Jackson all showing symptoms. The ventilation won't be fixed for at least 6 hours. 6 hours. Kate realized with a sick feeling that they would be forced to work side by side, cell by cell, monitoring the inmates who couldn't be moved. No retreat, no professional distance. Just her, Jerome, and the ticking clock toward his execution in 18 hours. The first hour passed in a blur of medical assessments. Kate moved efficiently from cell to cell, checking oxygen saturation levels, monitoring breathing patterns, administering bronchodilators through the food slots. The gas leak had affected everyone differently. Some inmates were merely uncomfortable, others struggled with each breath. Jerome fell somewhere in the middle. His breathing was labored but stable, his oxygen levels concerning but not critical. When Kate reached his cell with her equipment, he was sitting calmly despite his obvious discomfort. "How are you feeling?" she asked through the slot, her voice muffled by the respirator mask. "Been better," he said, then coughed harshly. "Been worse too." Kate checked his pulse through the slot. "Elevated but strong. I need to monitor you more closely than the others. Your execution is tomorrow, and they need you medically stable." The words hung between them like a blade. Jerome studied her face through the small opening, reading something in her expression that she couldn't hide. "You're staying close on purpose," he observed quietly. "This isn't just about medical protocol." Kate's hands stilled on her stethoscope. She looked around the corridor. Other officers and medical staff were busy with their own emergencies, no one paying attention to cell 12. "Jerome, about yesterday. Don't." His voice was gentle but firm. "Don't apologize for being realistic. Don't apologize for protecting yourself. But I made you a promise." Jerome leaned closer to the food slot, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "Nurse Morrison. Kate, you gave me something more valuable than any promise. You gave me hope for 3 days. You made me believe, even for a little while, that miracles still happen." Kate felt tears threatening again. "That's not enough." "It's everything," Jerome said simply. "When you've been on death row for 3 months, 3 days of hope is a lifetime." A harsh coughing fit seized him, and Kate instinctively reached through the slot to steady him. Her hand landed on his shoulder, feeling the tremor in his breathing, the warmth of his skin through the thin prison shirt. Easy, she murmured. The same tone she'd used with Michael during his difficult nights. Just breathe through it. When the coughing subsided, Jerome looked at her with those knowing eyes. Tell me about your son. The question hit like a physical blow. How did you... You got the look, Jerome said softly. Same look my mama had after my little brother died. Same way you touch people. Like you're trying to heal something that can't be healed. Kate found herself talking before she could stop herself, words pouring out that she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Michael. He was 22. Drunk driver ran a red light. He was going to be a teacher. Elementary school kids. He loved kids. Wanted to make a difference. What would he think about you helping me see Keisha? The question was so unexpected, so direct, that Kate laughed despite her tears. He'd probably say, I was being stubborn and idealistic. He always said, I had a savior complex. Sounds like a smart boy. The smartest. Kate wiped her eyes with the back of her gloved hand. He would have liked you, I think. He always saw the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. Jerome was quiet for a long moment, just breathing carefully through the contaminated air. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made Kate lean closer to hear him. Kate, can I tell you something about the night I killed Mrs. Patterson? Kate's body went rigid. She'd avoided knowing details about his crime, had deliberately kept that clinical distance, but trapped here in this enforced intimacy, she couldn't escape. You don't have to. I need to, Jerome said firmly. I need someone to know the truth before tomorrow. Kate found herself nodding, settling into the plastic chair someone had brought for the medical staff to use during their long vigil. I was high, Jerome began, his voice steady but pained. Crack cocaine. Hadn't eaten in 3 days, hadn't slept in longer than that. Went into that store just wanting enough money for another hit. Mrs. Patterson, Evelyn Patterson. She looked at me when I came in, and even scared as she was, she asked if I was okay. Asked if I needed help. Jerome's breathing grew more labored, though Kate couldn't tell if it was from the gas or the memory. I was so messed up, so desperate. I thought she was mocking me. This little old lady, asking if I needed help while I was robbing her. So I got angry. Started yelling. She tried to calm me down, kept saying, "It's okay, son. It's okay," called me son. Kate felt her chest tighten with the weight of his confession. My gun went off. I swear to God I didn't mean to pull that trigger, but it went off, and she looked so surprised, like she couldn't believe someone would hurt her when she was trying to help. She died calling me son. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 20 years of guilt and regret. Kate found herself thinking about Evelyn Patterson's family, about their own grief and loss. But she also thought about the broken young man Jerome had been, high and desperate, and making a split-second decision that would destroy multiple lives. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "Because I need you to know that I understand the cost of what I did. I understand why her family hates me, why the system wants me dead. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve." Jerome met her eyes through the slot. "But I'm also asking you to see that people can change, that the man who killed Mrs. Patterson isn't the same man who wants to walk his daughter down the aisle." Kate stared at him, this complicated man who contained both a killer and a father, both devastating selfishness and profound remorse. In the red emergency lighting, surrounded by the chaos of the medical emergency, she felt something shift inside her chest, not absolution for his crime, but recognition of his humanity. "The gas leak," she said suddenly, the realization hitting her like lightning. "What about it?" Kate looked around the corridor, at the emergency lights, at the controlled chaos that had trapped them all here together. "It's bought us time. 6 more hours before they can move anyone. 6 hours before the execution protocols have to resume." Jerome's eyes widened as he understood what she was thinking. "Kate, no, don't go down that road again. Don't set yourself up for more disappointment." But Kate was already standing, her mind racing through possibilities, protocols, emergency procedures. Sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you need, even if it comes wrapped in crisis. Jerome, she said, pulling out her phone. What's Keisha's number? If this story is touching your heart the way it's touching mine, please hit that like button. You know, there are so many beautiful stories of love and redemption happening all around us, but they go unnoticed because people scroll past without engaging. Don't let this father's love story disappear into the algorithm. Your like could help another family going through separation find hope. It takes 1 second, but it could change someone's entire perspective on forgiveness. The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. Kate's heart hammered as she pressed the phone closer to her ear, standing in the shadowed alcove near the medical station where she could speak privately. Around her, the emergency continued, officers coordinating repairs, medical staff monitoring inmates, the red lights painting everything in urgent crimson. Is this Keisha Washington? A pause, then, more alertly. Yes. Who is this? My name is Kate Morrison. I'm a nurse at the state correctional facility where your father is, where Jerome is being held. The sharp intake of breath was audible even through the phone. Is he okay? Did something happen? He's fine. Well, he's dealing with a respiratory issue from a gas leak, but he's stable. Kate found herself gripping the phone tighter. Keisha, he told me about your letter, about what you want. Silence stretched across the line, filled with 20 years of longing and fear. I know the warden said it was impossible. Keisha's voice was barely a whisper, but I had to try. He's my daddy, you know. I don't care what he did, I need him to know I turned out okay. That his little girl grew up strong. Kate closed her eyes, seeing Jerome's face when he'd read that letter, the careful way he'd held those photographs. Keisha, where are you right now? Atlanta. I drove down from nursing school in Charleston as soon as I got word about the execution date. I'm in a hotel about 20 minutes from the prison. Her voice cracked. I've been sitting in the parking lot for 2 days, just staring at the walls, trying to work up the courage to request a visit. Kate's mind raced, 20 minutes away. The gas leak buying them precious hours. The chaos providing cover for decisions that would normally require layers of approval. Keisha, I need you to listen carefully. Can you be here in 30 minutes? What? Yes, but they won't let me in. The warden already said. Don't go to the main entrance. There's a service road on the east side of the facility. I'll meet you there. Kate's voice carried a certainty that surprised even her. And Keisha, bring your wedding dress. 25 minutes later, Kate slipped through a service door she'd used countless times for smoke breaks over the years. The pre-dawn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine trees and distant highway exhaust. Her heart pounded as she waited, second-guessing every decision that had led to this moment. Headlights swept across the empty service road, and a small Honda Civic pulled up near the fence. Kate watched as a young woman got out, tall like her father, with his intelligent eyes but softer features. Even in jeans and a simple sweater, she carried herself with the quiet dignity that Kate had recognized in Jerome. Miss Morrison. Keisha's voice trembled slightly. Call me Kate. She opened the service gate. Technically a massive breach of protocol that could cost her job, her pension, possibly even land her in legal trouble. Are you ready for this? Keisha nodded, clutching a garment bag to her chest. I've been ready for 20 years. Kate led her through corridors she'd never shown to civilians, past security checkpoints, where officers were too busy managing the emergency to question an additional medical consultant. The lie came easily. Family member with nursing background called in to assist with the respiratory crisis. As they approached Block C, Kate stopped and turned to face the young woman who looked so much like her father. Keisha, before we go any further, I need you to understand something. Your father is a good man who did a terrible thing 20 years ago. He's spent every day since then trying to become worthy of forgiveness. He may never receive, but he loves you. Everything he's become, all the growth and change I've witnessed, it's been driven by his love for you. Keisha wiped tears from her eyes. I know what he did. I read the court transcripts, the newspaper articles. I know about Mrs. Patterson and her family. But I also know that the man who's been writing me letters for the past month, careful, thoughtful letters about books he's read and things he's learned, That man isn't the same person who walked into that store. Kate felt a jolt of surprise. He's been writing to you? 3 letters, Keisha said, reaching into her purse. Would you like to see them? With trembling hands, Kate unfolded the first letter, written in Jerome's careful script. My dearest Keisha, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I had to try. Your mother sent me one picture when you were 5. You were missing your front teeth and grinning at the camera like you'd just discovered the secret to happiness. I've kept that picture for 15 years, and it's gotten me through some of the darkest nights of my life. I want you to know that not a day has passed that I haven't thought about you. Not a day that I haven't wondered what kind of woman you were becoming, what dreams you were chasing, whether you were happy. I know I lost the right to be part of your life the night I made the worst decision any human being can make, but you need to know that you saved me anyway. In this place, it's easy to forget that you're human. Easy to become the monster everyone believes you are. But every time I looked at your picture, I remembered that I'm your daddy, and that means something. It means I have to be better than the worst thing I've ever done. Kate's vision blurred as she read. This wasn't the Jerome Washington she'd kept at professional distance for 3 months. This was a father's heart laid bare. A man transformed by love he might never be allowed to give. The second letter detailed his daily routine, his education in prison, his work in the library helping other inmates learn to read. The third was shorter, written after receiving Keisha's photographs. Baby girl, seeing you graduate from nursing school made me so proud I couldn't stop crying for an hour. You chose to heal people, to help people, even though the world gave you every reason to be bitter and angry. You are everything I hoped you would become, and more than I ever deserved to father. I know my time is running out, and I know the chances are slim that we'll ever meet face to face. But if we never get that chance, I need you to know this. You are the best thing I've ever done in this world. You are my redemption, my proof that even in the worst circumstances, love can create something beautiful. All my love forever, Daddy. Kate folded the letters with shaking hands, understanding now why Jerome had seemed different, why he'd been able to see through her defenses so clearly. This man had spent years learning to love someone he might never see again. He understood the ache of permanent separation, the way grief could hollow you out from the inside. He's in cell 12, Kate said quietly. Are you ready? The corridor was quieter now, most of the medical crisis under control. Kate had positioned herself strategically, knowing which officers would be on duty, which blind spots existed in the security cameras. As they approached Jerome's cell, she saw him sitting on his bunk, still pressing a damp towel to his face. Jerome, Kate called softly. I have someone here to see you. He looked up, and Kate watched 20 years of pain and hope collide in his expression as his eyes found his daughter through the reinforced glass. Keisha pressed her hands against the window, tears streaming down her face. Daddy. The word was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of 2 decades. Jerome stood slowly, moving to the window until only inches and bulletproof glass separated them. He placed his palm against the glass, and Keisha matched it on her side. My beautiful girl, he whispered, his voice breaking. Look how tall you got. Look how strong. I brought my wedding dress, Keisha said through her tears. It's not much, but if we can't have a real ceremony, maybe we can at least. Kate's heart broke and soared simultaneously as she watched father and daughter see each other for the first time in 20 years. But even as the moment unfolded, she was acutely aware of the impossibility of their situation, the glass between them, the execution scheduled for 14 hours, the fact that she was risking everything for a few stolen moments. What would drive someone to risk their career and security for a stranger's happiness? Have you ever taken a leap of faith for someone else's dream? Share what love looks like when everything seems impossible. Then Jerome spoke words that changed everything. Kate, there's something else in my personal effects. Something I've been saving for 20 years, waiting for this moment. It's in the property room, logged under personal religious items. What is it? Jerome's smile was radiant, despite the circumstances. My grandmother's wedding ring. The one I was planning to give to Denise before everything went wrong. I've been holding on to it, hoping that maybe someday. He looked at his daughter with infinite tenderness. Baby girl, I can't walk you down a traditional aisle, but maybe we can find another way. And in that moment, Kate Morrison realized that sometimes miracles don't look like what you expect. Sometimes they look like a father's love preserved across 20 years of separation, a daughter's forgiveness transcending the worst circumstances, and a nurse who remembers why she chose to heal people in the first place. The property room is 3 floors down, Kate whispered, her mind already calculating risks and timing. I can get the ring, but we'll need witnesses for any kind of ceremony, even an improvised one. Keisha pressed closer to the glass, separating her from her father. What about the other inmates? Could they serve as witnesses? Jerome's laugh was soft but genuine, the first time Kate had heard him truly laugh. Baby girl, you want convicted felons as your wedding witnesses. I want people who understand what love looks like when the world says it's impossible, Keisha replied firmly. Besides, you're my daddy. If you trust them, I trust them. Kate felt something warm spread through her chest as she watched this young woman who had every reason to be bitter, angry, broken, choose love over logic, hope over fear. She reminded Kate so powerfully of Michael, who had always believed the best of people even when they disappointed him. Jerome, what about Tommy Rodriguez and Robert Chen? They both asked about you during the medical checks. They seem, Kate paused, searching for the right word. They seem to care. Tommy's been here 6 years. He was a teacher before. Jerome's voice trailed off. He's officiated a couple of hand-fasting ceremonies for inmates who wanted to commit to each other. Nothing legal, but meaningful. Kate made her decision with the swift certainty that had carried her through 22 years of medical emergencies. I'll get the ring. You talk to Tommy about performing a ceremony. We have maybe 2 hours before the repairs are finished and normal protocols resume. She turned to go, then stopped. Keisha, do you have everything you need for getting ready? Keisha held up her garment bag with a trembling smile. Dress, shoes, my grandmother's pearl necklace. I even brought makeup. She laughed, shakily. I kept thinking about how crazy this was, packing wedding accessories to visit death row, but I couldn't help myself. There's a staff bathroom down the hall with a mirror and good lighting, Kate said. When I get back with the ring, you can change there. The property room was a bureaucratic maze of metal shelves and labeled boxes, but Kate had retrieved inmate belongings before for medical purposes. She found Jerome's box filed under W, surprised by how small it was. 20 years of a man's life reduced to 1 cardboard container. Inside a worn leather Bible, 3 paperback books, a small wooden cross, letters tied with string, and wrapped in a faded velvet pouch, a simple gold band that caught the fluorescent light like captured sunlight. Kate held the ring up to examine it. It was clearly old, probably from the 1940s or 50s, with a delicate filigree pattern worn smooth by decades of wear. She could picture Jerome's grandmother wearing it, could imagine the love stories this small circle of gold had witnessed. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Wells. Where are you? Need help with Chen's breathing treatment. Kate's hands shook as she typed back, checking medical supplies in storage. Be there in 10 minutes. She was running out of time, running out of cover stories, running out of rational reasons for the risks she was taking. But when she thought about Jerome's face when he saw his daughter, about Keisha's determination to have this moment despite everything the world had thrown at her, she knew she couldn't stop now. Back on Block C, Kate found that word had somehow spread among the inmates with the mysterious efficiency of prison communication. As she approached Jerome's cell, she could see faces at windows. Not the usual hostile curiosity, but something softer, something that looked remarkably like anticipation. Nurse Morrison called out Robert Chen from cell 8. Tommy says we're having a wedding. Been a long time since this block had something to celebrate. From cell 6, an older man named Frank Williams added, my daughter got married 5 years ago. Never got to see her in her dress. Would be an honor to witness someone else's little girl get her moment. Kate felt tears threaten as she realized what was happening. These men, convicted of terrible crimes, forgotten by the world, facing either death or life sentences, were choosing to participate in an act of pure love. They were becoming a community around this impossibly hopeful moment. Tommy Rodriguez had been moved to the common area near Jerome's cell, his medical monitoring equipment making it necessary for him to be accessible to staff. He looked up as Kate approached. "Jerome told me what you're doing," he said quietly. "What we're all doing. Ma'am, I haven't performed a wedding in 3 years, not since they moved me to death row, but I'd be honored to officiate for Keisha and her young man." Kate paused, confused. Her young man? Jerome's smile was radiant. "Kate, meet David Chen, no relation to Robert. He drove down from Charleston with Keisha. Been waiting in that hotel parking lot right alongside her, trying to convince her to take the leap." Kate turned to see a young man standing quietly near the medical station. Asian features, kind eyes, wearing a simple dark suit that suggested he'd come prepared for exactly this possibility. He stepped forward and extended his hand. "Miss Morrison, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing. Keisha's been carrying this dream for months, and I love her enough to get married on death row, if that's what it takes." The simple declaration hit Kate like a physical force. Here was love in its purest form, not demanding ideal circumstances, not waiting for perfect timing, just showing up wherever the heart led. "How long have you two been together?" Kate asked. 3 years, David replied. "Since nursing school, she told me about her father on our second date, told me about the letters, about her hopes for some kind of reconciliation. I knew from the beginning that loving Keisha meant accepting all of her story, including this part." Kate looked around at the assembled group, a condemned father, a forgiving daughter, a devoted fiancé, a teacher turned officiant, and a collection of witnesses who understood the preciousness of love because they'd lost so much of it themselves. She thought about Michael, about how he would have loved this moment, this gathering of broken people choosing to create something beautiful. "Keisha," she called to the young woman who had been quietly changing in the staff bathroom. "Are you ready?" The bathroom door opened and Kate's breath caught. Keisha had transformed into a vision of grace and hope. Her dress was simple but elegant, ivory lace with pearl buttons, knee-length and perfect for the circumstances. Her grandmother's pearls gleamed at her throat, and she'd woven small white flowers from the prison's garden into her dark hair. She was radiant. Jerome pressed his face to the window of his cell, tears streaming freely. "Baby girl, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Tommy Rodriguez cleared his throat, his voice carrying the authority of someone who understood the weight of the moment. "Friends, we gather here in unusual circumstances to witness the union of Keisha Washington and David Chen. We may not have a traditional church or a traditional altar, but we have something more precious. We have love that refuses to be defeated by circumstance." Kate found herself standing beside the cell window, holding the grandmother's ring, serving as both maid of honor and mother figure to a young woman she'd known for less than 3 hours, but somehow understood completely. "David," Tommy continued, "do you take Keisha as your wife, promising to honor and cherish her, to stand beside her through whatever storms may come?" "I do," David said firmly, taking Keisha's hand. "Keisha, do you take David as your husband, promising to love and support him, to build a life of purpose and joy together?" "I do," Keisha whispered, then looked at her father through the glass. "Daddy, will you give me away?" Jerome pressed his palm to the glass and Keisha matched it on her side, their own version of walking down the aisle. "Baby girl, it would be the greatest honor of my life." Kate slipped the grandmother's ring through the food slot, watching as Jerome's shackled hands carefully passed it to his daughter. The simple gold band caught the harsh corridor lighting and transformed it into something warm and golden. "By the power vested in me by love itself," Tommy declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." As David and Keisha kissed, cheers erupted from the cells lining the corridor. Men who hadn't had reason to celebrate in years were shouting congratulations, calling out blessings, creating a chorus of joy that transformed death row into something approaching sacred space. Kate wiped tears from her eyes, thinking about all the weddings she'd never attend, all the grandchildren she'd never hold, all the celebrations that had been stolen from her by tragedy. But in this moment, surrounded by love that had found a way to bloom in the most impossible soil, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 13 years. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. Jerome was sobbing openly now, his face pressed to the glass as he watched his daughter in her wedding dress, married at last, surrounded by unlikely friends who had chosen to make this moment sacred. "Thank you," he mouthed to Kate through his tears. "Thank you for my miracle." And Kate Morrison, who had spent over 2 decades believing that miracles were for other people, realized she had just participated in the most beautiful wedding she'd ever witnessed. The celebration lasted exactly 14 minutes. Kate was still wiping tears from her eyes when she heard the heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor, the unmistakable cadence of Warden Collins in full authority mode. Her blood turned to ice as she saw him approaching with 2 security officers, his face thunderous with barely controlled rage. "What the hell is going on in my facility?" His voice cut through the lingering joy like a blade through silk. The corridor fell silent instantly. Inmates retreated from their windows. Tommy Rodriguez looked down at his hands. Even David instinctively stepped back from Keisha, as if proximity to her might make things worse. But it was too late to hide what had happened. Keisha stood in the middle of the corridor in her wedding dress, the grandmother's ring gleaming on her finger, her face flushed with happiness that was already beginning to fade. "Warden Collins," Kate began, her voice steadier than she felt. "There was a medical emergency that required bringing unauthorized civilians into a maximum security death row facility." The warden's eyes were cold fury. "A medical emergency that required conducting a wedding ceremony for a condemned inmate 12 hours before his execution." Kate felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Someone had reported them. Someone had called the warden during what was supposed to be their window of opportunity. "Sir, I can explain. You can explain how you violated about 15 federal security protocols, how you compromised the safety of this facility, how you brought civilians into direct contact with dangerous inmates without proper authorization." The warden stepped closer, his voice rising. "You can explain how you thought your personal feelings gave you the right to turn my prison into a goddamn chapel." "She was just trying to help," Keisha said quietly, moving protectively toward Kate. "I asked her to—" "Ma'am, you need to stop talking immediately," Warden Collins snapped. "Officer Thompson, escort these civilians from the facility, now, and contact the district attorney's office. I want charges filed against anyone who violated security protocols tonight." Kate felt the bottom drop out of her world. Criminal charges. Her career destroyed. Her pension gone. 22 years of service wiped away in one night of impossible hope. But worse than her own consequences was watching the light die in Jerome's eyes as reality crashed back in. Through his cell window she could see him processing what was happening. His daughter being torn away from him hours before his execution. The people who had helped them facing legal consequences because of his impossible wish. "Stop," Jerome called out, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the corridor pause. "Warden Collins, please. This is on me. These people were just trying to show mercy to a dying man." "Washington, you're scheduled for execution in 10 hours. Your opinion on prison policy is irrelevant." The casual cruelty of the statement hit Kate like a physical blow. She watched Jerome flinch, watched him shrink back from the window, watched the man who had been radiant with fatherly pride moments ago remember that he was nothing more than a case number awaiting disposal. "Please," Keisha whispered, still in her wedding dress, her bouquet of prison garden flowers wilting in her trembling hands. "Just give us a few more minutes. I'll leave quietly. I won't cause any more trouble. I just want to say goodbye to my father." "Your father forfeited the right to family visits when he murdered an innocent woman," Warden Collins replied without a trace of compassion. "This circus is over. Officers, remove these people from my facility immediately." Kate watched in horror as security officers moved toward Keisha and David. The young woman looked desperately toward her father's cell, still wearing his grandmother's ring, still glowing with the remnants of the most beautiful moment of her life. "Daddy," she called out, her voice breaking. Jerome pressed his face to the window, his own voice cracking with pain. "I love you, baby girl. I'm so proud of who you've become. Live a beautiful life. Be happy." "No." Keisha broke free from the officers trying to escort her away, running back toward her father's cell. "I'm not ready. I just found you. I can't lose you again." The officers grabbed her arms, and Kate watched 20 years of longing and hope shatter in real time. Keisha was sobbing now, reaching desperately toward the glass that separated her from her father, being pulled away by men who saw her as nothing more than a security breach to be corrected. "Get your hands off my wife," David said firmly, moving to intervene, and Kate realized with growing horror that the situation was escalating beyond anyone's control. "David, don't," she called out, but it was too late. The young man was stepping between his new bride and the officers, his protective instincts overriding his common sense. Within seconds, David was face down on the concrete floor, hands zip-tied behind his back, while Keisha screamed his name, and Jerome pounded helplessly against his cell window. "Stop this," Kate found herself shouting, her carefully controlled professional demeanor finally cracking completely. "They're not criminals. They're just people in love who wanted one moment of happiness before the state kills her father." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Kate immediately knew she'd gone too far. Warden Collins turned on her with the full weight of his authority. "Nurse Morrison, you are terminated. Effective immediately. You will be escorted from this facility and barred from returning. Criminal charges will be filed within the hour." His voice was ice-cold, final. "Security will escort you to clean out your locker. You have 10 minutes. 22 years. 22 years of service, of dedication, of showing up every day to care for people nobody else wanted to care about. Gone in an instant, because she'd chosen compassion over protocol." Kate looked around the corridor that had been her second home for over 2 decades, at Tommy Rodriguez, who wouldn't meet her eyes, at the other inmates who had retreated into their cells like animals sensing danger, at Jerome, whose face was a mask of devastation and guilt. "I'm sorry," Jerome mouthed through the glass, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Kate." But she wasn't sorry. Even facing criminal charges, even losing everything she'd worked for, she wasn't sorry. She'd helped her father see his daughter married. She'd participated in something sacred and beautiful. She'd remembered why she'd become a nurse in the first place. As security officers flanked her on both sides, Kate took one last look at cell 12. Jerome had his palms pressed to the glass, and even through her tears, she could see the love and gratitude in his eyes. "It was worth it," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. Every single consequence was worth it. The last thing she heard as they escorted her away was Keisha's voice, broken and desperate, calling out, "I love you, Daddy. I forgive you. I forgive you." And then the heavy doors of Block C slammed shut behind her, separating Kate Morrison from the world she'd known for 22 years, from the man whose impossible wish had cost her everything, and from the part of herself that had finally remembered how to love without fear. In 10 hours, Jerome Washington would be dead. Kate Morrison's career was already buried, and somewhere in the distance, dawn was breaking on a world that seemed determined to punish people for choosing hope over despair, love over safety, miracles over rules. The shatter point had been reached. Nothing would ever be the same again. "I know your heart is breaking right now. Mine is too. But here's the thing. If you don't subscribe and turn on notifications, you might miss the ending. You might never know if Jerome gets to say goodbye to his daughter. You might never find out if Kate's sacrifice meant anything. There are thousands of people watching this story unfold, but only a small percentage will subscribe to see how it ends. Don't be the person who walks away right when love needs you most. Hit subscribe, because some stories are too important to miss." Kate sat in her empty apartment at 3:47 a.m., staring at the termination letter that had been hand-delivered 2 hours earlier. The words blurred together through her exhaustion. Violation of security protocols, criminal investigation pending, immediate revocation of facility access. Her uniform hung in the closet like a ghost of the woman she'd been 12 hours ago. Her badge sat on the kitchen counter, stripped of its power to open doors, to provide access to the world where she'd found purpose for over 2 decades. In 6 hours, Jerome Washington would be executed, and she would be sitting in this apartment, powerless to do anything but watch the news reports and wonder if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, Miss Morrison. "This is David Chen. They released me an hour ago. Keisha and I are at the Hampton Inn, room 237. We need to talk." Kate stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the delete button. Getting involved further would only make things worse for everyone. She'd already lost her career, faced potential criminal charges. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to disappear, hire a lawyer, try to salvage what she could of her life. Instead, she found herself putting on shoes and grabbing her car keys. Room 237 was barely lit by a single bedside lamp when Keisha opened the door. She'd changed out of her wedding dress into jeans and a sweater, but her grandmother's pearls still gleamed at her throat. Her eyes were red from crying, but they held a determination that reminded Kate powerfully of Jerome. David stood by the window, still wearing his wedding suit, his tie loosened and hanging around his neck like a noose. His face bore the bruises of his encounter with prison security, but his expression was resolute. "Miss Morrison," Keisha said quietly, "we heard about what happened to you, about your job, the charges they're filing. I'm so sorry." Kate shook her head. "Don't apologize for my choices, Keisha. I knew the risks." "But you took them anyway," David said, turning from the window. "Why? You barely knew us. You barely knew a. Why would you risk everything for strangers?" The question hung in the small hotel room like incense, heavy and sacred. Kate thought about Michael, about the nights she'd sat beside his hospital bed watching him fight for breath, about the way the medical staff had maintained professional distance while her son was dying, about 22 years of keeping her own professional walls intact. "Because I remembered something I'd forgotten," she said finally. "I remembered that healing isn't just about medicine and protocols. Sometimes healing means breaking rules. Sometimes it means choosing love over safety." Keisha moved closer, her young face earnest with desperate hope. "Miss Morrison, we've been talking, David and I, about tomorrow morning. About letting Daddy die alone while we're banned from the facility. There's nothing we can do," Kate said gently. "The warden was clear. You're both barred from the facility. I'm facing criminal charges. It's over." "What if it doesn't have to be?" David's voice was quiet but intense. "What if there was still a way?" Kate felt a familiar chill of recognition, the same feeling she'd had in the gas-filled corridor, when opportunity had presented itself disguised as crisis. "David, what are you thinking?" He moved to the small hotel desk and pulled out a manila folder. "I did some research tonight, about execution protocols, about final witness procedures, about who has access to condemned inmates in their final hours." Kate's heart began to race. "David, the chaplain has unlimited access until the final hour," he continued. "Family members can request spiritual counseling from outside clergy if the prison chaplain is unavailable or if they have specific religious requirements." Keisha picked up the thread, her voice gaining strength. "David's uncle is an ordained minister. He's been trying to reach us since he heard about the wedding. He wants to help." Kate felt the familiar pull of dangerous hope. You want to get a minister to request access to Jerome for final spiritual counseling. "Not just any minister," David said. "A minister who happens to be bringing 2 grief counselors to help the family process their loss. Grief counselors who specialize in helping children say goodbye to dying parents." The audacity of the plan took Kate's breath away. "You want to impersonate grief counselors?" "I want to be with my father when he dies," Keisha said simply. "I want him to know he's not alone. I want him to see that his love created something beautiful, that his daughter grew up to be someone who fights for what's right, just like he taught her in his letters." Kate looked at these 2 young people, barely 24 years old, married for less than a day, willing to risk everything for a few final moments with a condemned man. She thought about the safe choice, The smart choice. The choice that would minimize further damage to all their lives. Then she thought about Jerome, alone in his cell, probably lying awake knowing he would die in a few hours, having cost the people he cared about everything they'd risked for him. "What would you need from me?" Kate heard herself asking. David's relief was palpable. Someone with medical credentials to verify that Keisha needs specialized grief counseling due to trauma related to her father's incarceration. Someone with 22 years of experience working with condemned inmates who can speak to the psychological impact of execution on family members. "You want me to provide professional documentation for your fake grief counseling credentials?" "We want you to help us be with him," Keisha said, tears flowing freely now. "We want you to help us make sure he doesn't die thinking he destroyed the lives of everyone who tried to love him." Kate closed her eyes, seeing Jerome's face when the wedding was interrupted, the devastation in his expression as he realized what his wish had cost them all. She thought about Michael, about how much it had meant to have people with him in his final moments, about the difference between dying alone and dying surrounded by love. "If we do this," she said slowly, "if we somehow pull this off, it won't change anything. Jerome will still die at 8 a.m. You'll still be banned from future visits. I'll still face criminal charges. But he won't die alone," Keisha whispered. "He won't die thinking he destroyed our lives. He'll die knowing he was loved, that his love mattered, that choosing to be a father even from death row was the most important thing he ever did." Kate opened her eyes and looked at this remarkable young woman who had inherited not just her father's eyes, but his capacity for love in impossible circumstances. "I know a minister who owes me a favor," she said quietly, "and I still have access to my medical credentials for another 72 hours. The smile that spread across Keisha's face was radiant with hope and determination. "Does that mean—" "It means we're going to break about 12 more laws before sunrise," Kate said, feeling more alive than she had in 22 years. "It means your father is not going to die alone. Have you ever had to choose between following rules and following your heart? What would you risk for someone else's final moments of peace? Tell us about a time when love required breaking the rules." As dawn approached and they finalized their impossible plan, Kate Morrison realized that some choices aren't about weighing consequences. They're about remembering who you are when everything else is stripped away. And she was a healer. She was someone who fought for love over fear, hope over despair, connection over safety. Even if it cost her everything she had left, she was going to make sure Jerome Washington died, knowing that his love had created something beautiful in the world. The choice was made. Now came the execution of both their plan and the man who had reminded them all what it meant to love without conditions. At 6:15 a.m., Reverend James Chen walked through the main entrance of the state correctional facility with the quiet authority of a man who had comforted families through their darkest hours for 37 years. Behind him, two women in conservative dark suits carried briefcases and wore the serious expressions of professional grief counselors. Kate's heart hammered as she presented her hastily forged credentials to the guard at the checkpoint. 24 hours ago, she'd been Catherine Morrison, respected prison nurse. Now she was Dr. Catherine Morrison, PhD in grief psychology, specializing in family trauma related to capital punishment. The false credentials were flawless. David had worked through the night creating documents that would pass casual inspection. Kate's 22 years of legitimate experience with condemned inmates provided authenticity that no amount of forgery could replicate. "Purpose of visit?" the guard asked routinely. "Final spiritual counseling and family grief support," Reverend Chen replied calmly. "The condemned man's daughter is experiencing severe psychological distress related to her father's execution. Dr. Morrison and her associate are here to provide crisis intervention." Kate glanced sideways at Keisha, who looked every inch the traumatized family member in her dark suit, her wedding ring hidden beneath professional gloves, her eyes red-rimmed from genuine grief and exhaustion. The guard checked their names against the approved visitor list, a list that had been mysteriously updated at 4 a.m. when Kate's old friend in administration, Dr. Patricia Wells, had made some entries she would later claim were clerical errors. "You have until 7:30, the guard said, handing them visitor badges. The execution team takes custody at 7:30 sharp. 1 hour and 15 minutes. It would have to be enough. Block C felt different in the early morning light. Quieter, more solemn, heavy with the weight of approaching finality. Kate noticed that most of the inmates were awake, standing at their cell windows in a show of respect that transcended the usual chaos of death row. Jerome sat on his bunk in the clean white shirt and dark pants provided for condemned inmates on their final day. He looked up as their small group approached, and Kate watched disbelief, hope, and overwhelming gratitude chase across his face. "Baby girl?" His voice was barely a whisper. "How are you? They said you were banned." "Daddy," Keisha said, her professional facade cracking as she pressed her hands to the reinforced glass. "We're here. We found a way to be here." Reverend Chen stepped forward with the quiet dignity that had carried him through hundreds of final visits. "Mr. Washington, I'm Reverend Chen. I'm here to provide spiritual comfort in your final hour and to help your family process their grief. These counselors are here to support your daughter through this difficult transition." Jerome looked at Kate, understanding flickering in his intelligent eyes. "Dr. Morrison," he said carefully, playing along with the fiction that was allowing them these precious moments. "Thank you for coming. She needs help understanding that what happened yesterday, the consequences people faced because of me, that wasn't her fault." "Actually, Mr. Washington," Kate said, settling into the plastic chair beside his cell window, "I'm here to help her understand that what happened yesterday was the most beautiful thing I've witnessed in 22 years of working in this system." Over the next hour, something sacred unfolded in that concrete corridor. Reverend Chen read passages about forgiveness and redemption. Keisha talked about her childhood, her dreams, her work as a nurse, her plans with David. Jerome shared stories about his transformation in prison, about the books he'd read, the letters he'd written, the man he'd become through loving his daughter from a distance. They talked about Mrs. Patterson, about the weight of his crime, about the family he'd destroyed, and his genuine remorse. They talked about cycles of violence and healing, about how love can grow in the darkest soil, about the difference between justice and vengeance. "Daddy," Keisha said as the clock moved towards 7:15, "I need you to know something. Yesterday, when Kate helped us get married, when all those men witnessed our ceremony, that wasn't just about me getting my dream wedding, that was about you becoming the father you always wanted to be. You gave me away. You blessed my marriage. You fulfilled every promise you made in your letters." Jerome's eyes filled with tears. "Baby girl, I'm so proud of who you've become. You chose to heal people. You chose David, who's going to love you the way you deserve. You chose forgiveness when you had every right to choose anger." "I chose what you taught me to choose," Keisha replied firmly. "In your letters, in the way you've lived these last 20 years, you taught me that people can change, that love is stronger than circumstances, that hope is worth fighting for, even when it seems impossible." Kate watched this father and daughter see each other clearly, not as victim and perpetrator, not as saint and sinner, but as two human beings who had found a way to love each other across 20 years of separation and pain. At 7:25, footsteps echoed in the corridor. The execution team was coming. "Time's up," a guard called out. "All visitors need to clear the area." Jerome stood and pressed his palms to the glass one final time. Keisha matched his gesture, and for a moment, father and daughter were as close as the bulletproof barrier would allow. "I love you, baby girl," Jerome whispered. "Live a beautiful life. Be happy. Choose hope. I love you too, Daddy. Thank you for fighting to become the father I needed you to be." As the execution team took custody of Jerome Washington, Kate felt something settle in her chest, a peace she hadn't experienced since Michael's death. She had helped a father and daughter find each other across impossible circumstances. She had participated in love's triumph over fear, hope's victory over despair. At 8:07 a.m., Jerome Washington was declared dead by lethal injection. According to the official record, he died alone except for the required witnesses and medical personnel. According to the truth that mattered, he died knowing he was loved, forgiven, and remembered not for the worst thing he had ever done, but for the best man he had fought to become. Kate Morrison faced criminal charges that were quietly dropped when the district attorney decided that prosecuting a nurse for showing compassion to a condemned man might not play well with voters. She never worked in corrections again, but found purpose as a hospice nurse, helping people die with dignity and surrounded by love. Keisha and David Chen moved to a small town in North Carolina, where Keisha worked in a community health clinic and David taught high school English. They named their first daughter Catherine Jerome Chen, and she grew up hearing stories about the grandmother she never met and the grandfather who had loved her mama enough to become a better man. On the anniversary of Jerome's execution, Kate received a package with no return address. Inside was a small framed photograph of a toddler with Jerome's eyes and Keisha's smile standing in a garden full of white flowers. On the back, in Keisha's careful handwriting, "She has your grandfather's eyes and his capacity for hope. Thank you for helping love win. Always, your family, K&D." Kate kept the photograph on her kitchen table, where it caught the morning light like a promise that miracles don't always look like what we expect. Sometimes they look like a nurse who remembers why she chose to heal, a daughter who chooses forgiveness over bitterness, and a condemned man who discovers that love can transform anyone, even in their final hour. Sometimes they look like wedding ceremonies in death row corridors, like impossible phone calls at 3 a.m., like the decision to choose hope over safety, love over fear, connection over self-preservation. Sometimes they look like the reminder that we are all more than the worst things we have ever done, and that love, real love, has the power to reach across any distance, survive any circumstance, and transform any heart willing to receive it. In the end, Jerome Washington's last wish had been fulfilled in ways none of them could have imagined. His daughter had been given away. His love had created something beautiful. And a hardened prison nurse had remembered that the most powerful medicine isn't found in any pharmacy. It's found in the courage to care about people when the world tells you it's too dangerous, too costly, too late. The story ends where it began, with love refusing to be defeated by circumstance. But now we know that sometimes, when love fights hard enough, when people risk everything for each other's happiness, when grace finds a way into the most impossible places, miracles don't just happen. They triumph. What would you do if faced with the choice to risk everything for someone else's peace? Have you ever witnessed love triumph over impossible circumstances? Share your thoughts about second chances, forgiveness, and the power of choosing hope when everything seems lost.
Beautiful souls. If Jerome and Kate's story touched your heart, the next one will absolutely destroy you in the best way. A story of impossible love that will leave you questioning everything you believe about second chances. Click the video on your screen right now. Your heart isn't ready, but you need to see this. Thank you for staying until the very end.